Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to SECAF's webinar entitled The Business of Projects. My name is Matt Agresti. I'm the co-chair of the SECAF Board of Directors and also a senior vice president with Bank of America. For those of you who may not know, SECAF is a not-for-profit association with a mission to connect, educate, and be champion for our government contracting community. We bring government and industry leaders together to interact with our member companies to help them navigate and provide a mechanism to succeed in the world of government contracting. Today's webinar is a series of webinars which are fundamental and educational on how-to webinars on topics including best practices, growth, and legislative and regulatory issues. We welcome your input for future topics at the end of this discussion. We're also going to be providing a post-webinar survey, which we also ask you to make suggestions after today's webinar. Before we get started, I wanted to provide a couple of guidelines. All participants are going to be muted, but you may ask a question at any time. To ask a question, move your cursor to the bottom of the screen where you will see a Q&A icon. If you click on that icon, you'll be able to type a question in the question dialog box. If we have time at the end of some questions, to answer some of the questions, we will. If not, our panelists are going to be reviewing the questions and will respond to you after the webinar. Last but not least, we're also going to be providing a link to the recorded webinar presentation to all the attendees this afternoon. Today's webinar is being presented by Uninet, a valuable partner of SECAF for many, many years. Our speakers today are Kim Koster, who's the product management evangelist at Uninet, and Rich Wilkinson, industry expert at Uninet as well. You'll see their bios as well. Kim and Rich, we thank you for being here today, and without any further delay, I'd like to turn this cockpit over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for having us. And so let me share my screen here. All right. All right, now I've got it into slide mode. So thank you everybody for attending our webcast today. We're very excited to be able to talk with you about how you can make your projects just wildly successful. That's really what it's all about if you're a project-based business. So Rich and I today are going to talk to you about the project lifecycle. And that's really going to ultimately be our agenda. And we're going to follow the project lifecycle throughout the webcast. And then we're going to talk about how you can maximize each segment of the project lifecycle to increase your project predictability, profitability, and ultimately how you can grow your organization. So I love to start off with this chart because it really does reflect the reality of today's projects. And I bet most of you are going to be able to relate to the little story that I'm going to tell. Now, I've been on many projects over my career of many different types, internal and external, and they all started out with this great feeling that everything was going to be different. This time we were going to follow our processes and deliver a product on cost and on schedule. At the beginning, the team had an optimistic view of how the project was going to go. We laid in our plan, and that's depicted by the dark blue line. And everything here was going great from January to March. And you can see that the blue and the green, lime green lines are together. Everything was going wonderful. Soon after that, the adrenaline wears off. We're in April. We get back to our old habits, our silos, and we start digging into the scope, and we have some problems. You know, and as with any can-do oriented team, we deal with those issues. And then something big happens in June. You can see on the chart that we're really diverging from our plan. The issue came out of nowhere and we really had no warning. Now the impact of that problem, it caught us completely off guard, and it's going to now lead to a late finish. And we all know that late is bad. And if you're a contractor, that means your profitability and now your reputation is impacted. For some GovCons, especially smaller ones, the impact of one unsuccessful project can mean their profit for the entire year. So why does this happen? And we all know that it happens. A lot of it is lack of attention to upfront planning. And to me, that's the major one. The other one is we go back into our old habits and we don't follow our own policies and procedures. We do minimal risk management, and we have inexperienced personnel, and we don't provide the necessary training, and we still have disparate systems. So what could help this from occurring? You guessed it, it's going to be concentration on the entire project lifecycle. Okay, and that gets us to our first poll. And these polls are really important to us. It gives us the ability to kind of tailor what we're talking about. So Rich and I will have a better idea of what the audience is interested in. So if you could fill these in, it just helps us talk a little bit more about what would be interesting to you. So what is your biggest project management challenge? Is it inexperienced project managers, poor scope definition, resource management, forecasting, or lack of visibility into project status? And I don't know if you guys are familiar, but Uninet and CohnReznick do a gauge report, and it is an industry roadmap of benchmarks and trends for GovCons. And in our 2019 report, we saw this year, we asked this exact same question. And this year, forecasting took over as the number one challenge. Prior years, it had been inexperienced project managers. So it'll be interesting to see what the results actually show. Oh, lack of visibility into project status is the number one. That's great. So number one was lack of visibility. The second was forecasting. And then poor scope definition, resource management, and then inexperienced project managers. That's great. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Project managers was last on the list?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yep. Very interesting. Okay. So Rich, you can take over from here. Thank you guys for filling that out.
Thanks, Kim. I don't think it'll be a surprise to anybody that projects have a life cycle. Projects, we get to create projects. They're born, they have a life, and sometimes that life can be really, really exciting. And then projects end. During that project life cycle, we do a lot of different things. Of course, at the beginning of the project, we're concerned primarily with winning it, and then initiating it, getting it started, planning for its execution. And that planning process isn't a one-shot deal. In today's world, planning is continuous, it almost has to be. And the execution of the project, planning and execution, frankly, are a circle. You plan, you execute, you replan, you execute some more, you replan, you execute again. And of course, throughout that life cycle, we're accounting for that project. Now, a lot of that happens in what we euphemistically call our back office, where we bill our clients for what we've done. We reflect the financial status of our projects in a P&L and on our balance sheets and those kinds of things. It's a whole lot easier to manage this whole project life cycle if you can do it with one integrated tool set. Not one tool for budgeting, something else for CRM, another tool for creating the proposals, and something else for project initiation and accounting for the projects, another planning tool. If all that can take place in one application with the results in one database and put it all under a single security model, that gives us an optimum tool that will let us do this whole life cycle with a minimum of wasted time and effort. And of course, that's a big part of what we do at Uninet. I don't seem to be able to advance the slide, Kim. Thank you. Now, let's take that whole pipeline thing from the very beginning. Pipeline is, and I'm sure you all know this, the pipeline is all the things that could be possible, both in the near term and further out. That pipeline, frankly, should be achievable, but if it's too achievable, if everything has a 80, 90, 100% probability, the BD person that lurks deep inside my soul would say, I'm not bidding enough jobs. I'm not taking enough risks. I'm not putting enough out there. On the other hand, if my whole pipeline is kind of iffy, I may be bidding too many jobs. Certainly that pipeline should be very tactical in the near term. We got to keep the workforce employed. We have to keep the cash coming in the door, but it has to be strategic in the long run. It has to guide my growth in the direction I want the whole company to eventually move. So the pipeline is key. It's not only a near-term tool to keep us working, It's a long-term tool to guide the direction of the company. So it has to be managed. And the question then is, are you managing your pipeline? And of course, that poll we just took that said our number one issue was lack of visibility into project status, I'd be willing to bet I could run the same poll on pipeline, and the number one issue would be lack of visibility into pipeline status. So the question is, if you're not managing your pipeline, why not? And chances are it has a lot to do with that visibility. So that pipeline is critical. It's the foundation of not only the annual operating plan, the near-term tactical stuff, but also the long-range plan that's going to inform and guide our strategic decisions about where we want the company to go. It should be the basis for the revenue forecast and the resource requirement plan. So the pipeline should predict not only how much I can make, the revenues I can generate, and hopefully the profits. It's always nice if the leftovers at the bottom of the statement are a positive number. But also, how much resources do I require, whether those are personnel resources, cash resources, credit resources, or even assets to make those plans happen, to fulfill that pipeline when it finally comes to fruition. Now that forecasting piece, that how much resources do I need and how much revenue am I going to generate, it is a science. It is numbers based, but it's a little bit of a black art too, because a lot of the judgments that go into the variables in our forecast come from experience. And good judgment, unfortunately, comes from having made bad judgments in the past and learned from that experience. And of course, learning from other people's experience is even less expensive and less painful than learning from your own. We have model scenarios for best fit and for doing what if. And one of those is something that I call P-win, probability of winning an individual job. Now, probability of winning an individual job is always 50-50 because it's a binary. Nobody wins a little bit. You either win the job or you don't. Now, I'm sort of ignoring the IDIQs where everybody gets one and it's an empty bag. But when it comes to bidding actual work, you either win or you don't. But on a macro basis, if I'm looking at an entire pipeline, I can assign a probability to each one of those. And the only thing that's a guarantee is that every one of those probabilities is wrong. But as a whole, it can tell me, if I use that as a factor, it can tell me how much I'm likely to have in terms of revenue, expenses, profit perhaps, and even resources if I apply that P-win. Next slide, Kim.
Hey, Rich, if you don't mind, I want to just, there's another couple of methods that we could use for what-ifing. One of them is, if you're doing your annual operating plan, we could look at expected value. So that's something, we have a lot of information in that current time period, and we may not want to use factoring at that point. We may just want to put in what we believe it's going to be. The other one is the idea of, it's called probability of award, and that really takes into account two variables. So the first variable is the P-win that Rich was talking about, and then it's multiplied times then the P-go. And that P-go is the probability that the customer is going to fund that work. And so to me, the POA method, it just gives you the opportunity to really dial in some variables into your forecasting that may have a big impact on your pipeline. So.
Thanks, Kim. Now, in Uninet, we actually have the ability to manage a pipeline, and you could do this in many other systems as well, by simply defining a project type as a pipeline project, and then go ahead and plan that project, plan the resources, forecast the revenue, calculate the profit, lay it out month over month or quarter over quarter or pay period over pay period, whatever your planning cycle demands. I know a lot of companies today that live on 90-day delivery orders. They plan in weeks, But I do know some companies that are planning in option years. They actually look at a year at a time or maybe at a quarter at a time. A flexible report that can show you that will let you do that kind of planning and then assign stages to that pipeline. This is a report that I helped one of our customers design, and we've since taken that report and fitted it into our demonstration database. And we defined 3 pipeline stages, and this is very generic. You might have 10 pipeline stages or 2. It's completely up to the company how to manage that pipeline. But in this demonstration database, my pipeline stage 1 was an opportunity, kind of blue sky stuff. Stage 2 was an opportunity for which we've made a bid decision and we've got a proposal in process. Stage 3 was a proposal actually submitted, hopefully before the deadline. And so we're awaiting either discussions or a BAFO request or best case, an award. You might have 2 or 3 or 4 more stages. After that, you might have a stage before opportunities are actually identified. But how many stages you have isn't really important. What we've done here is assign a standard probability to each of our stages. So we throw a 25% probability at stage 1, 50 at stage 2, 3/4, 75% at stage 3. And that P-win, we might tweak that from time to time on an individual opportunity, but that P-win lets me look at my pipeline and evaluate it and say, okay, if I'm really winning a quarter of all my opportunities, this is what I can expect out of the opportunities currently in my pipeline, and so on. And of course, once that pipeline is won, once one of those opportunities or proposals becomes a real job, turning it into a chargeable activity in the accounting system for us is just a few mouse clicks. Next. So we're to our poll number 2. And what we'd like to know this time are what are your biggest BD challenges when it comes to identifying and pursuing new work? Is it lack of past performance information? We see that a lot with smaller companies trying to break into this market space, but they don't have past performance to rely on to convince a customer they should take a chance on them. Lack of a teaming partner. Sometimes matchmaking is really key to putting together a successful proposal. Is it reporting tools? The ability to see the pipeline, see the resources, see what's available and what's needed? Or is it lack of BD funds? Is it access to credit, lack of cash? Or is it people? BD people that know the industry, know the market space, know the customers and the opportunity. What's driving your business development challenges?
Rich, I've typically seen it be the lack of funds and personnel, just not enough people and not enough funds to actually go out and bid all the things that they would like to bid.
Yeah, I agree, Kim. And with a good teaming partner, past performance information becomes less important because you can rely to some extent on your teaming partner's past performance to get you over that hump until you have your own.
So past performance is the biggest challenge, Rich, at 43%. The lack of business development funds was 29%, and the other 2, teaming partner and reporting tools, were 14%. So,
again, having done this for maybe even several years now, that's a sort of an inside joke with Kim and I. I've been doing this for way, way too long. I always found that a good teaming partner could make up for a lot of deficiencies. All right, let's really dig into that proposal, that cycle, and look at the pipeline by stage. Kim, isn't this one yours?
It is. So we're on the next section of the project lifecycle, which is the proposal generation. So when the opportunity gets to the point of becoming a proposal, it's still going to be part of the pipeline, okay? But now we really need to focus in and track it and manage it and really start to understand what our probability of win is going to be, maybe what our probability of go is going to be, and then start to understand what resources we're going to need. So starting to look at those resource needs early and often, to me, is very key in being successful, not just at this stage, but then throughout the entire project lifecycle. So let's see here. Okay, sorry about that. I went too far. Okay, so it does all start with a great proposal. And so we're going to talk a little bit about a couple of steps here for completing that proposal estimate. The first one, and I think it is the most important, is really understanding your scope. I've got a lot of horror stories I could tell about times that we bid different things, different projects, and did not have the right scope and what the impact was, especially when it was a fixed price contract. So taking that time to really comprehend the scope, to me, is the true key to being able to accurately estimate. And the other reason that is so important is because the proposal team at some point in time is going to hand this over to a project team to execute, and we want to give them the best opportunity, and I think understanding the scope is key to that. Also, if you have templates, project templates in your system that you can clone, especially if you're bidding like work, you could populate that template. You would have some past estimates, and hopefully you've collected your cost in a way that you're able to use for some past performance. And then timelines for tasks. So be able to take those and then just adjust that project, that proposal then for what you're actually going to bid, for the scope that you're going to be bidding on. You also want to go ahead in the proposal stage and establish a work breakdown structure. If you're not familiar with a work breakdown structure, it really is a hierarchical breakdown of the work on the project. And it also becomes the architecture for your costing. Okay, so it's a very important structure. It seems like it's just a code, but it's really so much more than that, because it's going to be something that you're going to use in your next proposal, in your next project. It's an extremely important structure. You're also going to want, in this proposal phase, to estimate your resources. And understand the timing that you're going to need those resources. And it's not just labor, but you're going to be looking at materials, services, ODC, and travel. And then you're going to want to time phase those estimates in the proposal. The reason that's so important is because you're going to need to communicate what funding you're going to need to your customer, what kind of resources you're going to need, and what kind of skills you're going to need. And ensuring that you have the right people with the right skills at the right time is really important. And that is going to require that you gain buy-in on this proposal, not just from the people who are sitting there working on the team, the proposal team, but also that you get it from the functional departments way before you submit to the customer, so that they understand what kind of skills that you may be needing before you submit the proposal. And I can't tell you how many times I've done that in my career, where we got so excited, submitted the proposal, and we did not ask the functional team if they had the resources that we needed, and then we had to scramble to get them. And so, you know, the one point I want to make as I get off this chart is to contract award. The proposal truly is that starting point for the project plans. It's the first big plan, and it becomes the basis then for the project. And so the proposal needs to be as good as it possibly can be with the monies and the time that you have. So again, can't stress how important that is. So Rich, you're next.
Yeah, that next stage, we've won.
Woohoo, woohoo, woohoo.
At one company that I worked for some years ago, we had a standard celebration we won. It was called a champagne and aspirin party. We'd pop a bottle of champagne and celebrate winning, and then we'd break out a bottle of aspirin for the headaches that were almost inevitable to ensue as we tried to turn that project or that proposal into a project. In today's environment, especially with integrated software, the kind of thing that's one database, one application, you can take a proposal that's already been costed out, the resources have already been assigned, the forecasts and estimates have been done, and turn that into a chargeable project, usually in a few minutes. Now, I've never actually seen one of those work breakdown structures that were associated with a proposal survive the first meeting with the customer, because invariably you sit down with a customer to talk about the work breakdown structure that was in the proposal, and the customer says, yeah, it was great in the proposal, but here's what we're really going to do. This goes over here, and this comes first, and that goes down to the end, and we're going to take this part out because we really don't need it, and we're going to insert this in its place. And an hour later, you've got a work breakdown structure that's completely different. A lot of older systems especially can't make those kinds of changes. The structures are fixed once they're implemented in a system. Newer systems, systems like Uninet, allow you to freely rearrange a work breakdown structure at the customer's demands and make it whatever it needs to be, but still retain all the rest of that resource work, the planning work, all of the things that were done during the proposal stage, and turn that thing into a project with a few mouse clicks. Next. So in order to be executable, you need to capture all the stuff from the proposal, like business requirements, the high-level budget, all the tasks, that work breakdown structure I was just talking about, and certainly a resource plan. Now, most systems, and I've always done this, whether it was Uninet or some other software system, I always tracked 3 sets of numbers when it came to project funding. First, there was the actual funding the customer gave me, and that one is absolutely inviolate. So that's what I have to work with. The assumption at the beginning almost has to be you're not getting any more. This is it. There are some circumstances when you can go back to the well, but frankly, in today's environment, they're few and far between. The second number I always tracked was budget, and budget was different from funding. So funding was what the customer gave the company. Budget was what the company gave me to get the work done. As a project manager, I didn't usually get all the funding released to me as a budget. I got 90% or 92% or 95%. There was always a management reserve held back. And Kim will probably talk about management reserve a little later when she talks about EVM, because it's an important concept there. But there was a third set of numbers. Regardless of the budget, and I usually couldn't modify my own budget. I had to go back to my bosses and say, hey, I need you to release a little bit of that management reserve. I know you've got some funding you didn't give me. I need some more budget. But other than that, the budget didn't change. What changes from day to day is the plan, because the plan's how I'm really going to get the work done. And invariably on day 2, I find out that John's not really available to be the project manager, but Susie is eminently qualified and she is available. Her rate's different. She works in a different division. Different overheads and fringes apply. In some systems, especially if your budgeting and planning system is a separate application from your accounting system, that becomes a real exercise. In more modern systems where you have an integrated database, I can simply pull that up, substitute Susan for John, and in a few minutes I have a plan that shows me new costs, new forecasts, new revenues, and I know what it's going to cost me. I know what it's going to do to me. Next.
Okay, so, some other ways that you can help improve your overall process is to have a project management office, or a PMO. And PMI, which is the Project Management Institute, it describes what a PMO is. And so it describes it as a strategic driver for organizational excellence, which seeks to enhance the practices of execution management, organizational governance, and strategic change leadership. And so in my mind, the project management office really guides this entire project lifecycle. But to me, it really picks up steam around the initiation phase, which is just what Rich was talking about. So we do have on our website, we do have a pretty detailed white paper on the functions of the PMO. So if you're interested in more detail, we're just kind of brushing through these concepts, but if you're interested in some more detail, it's out there. So the main focus of the PMO is we're talking about it today is to help project teams manage their projects successfully and give them the architecture to do that. So let's just talk about some of the things that they're supposed to be doing. They should have current policies and procedures. And those policies really need to be tailorable and they need to be current. So we don't want to have a set of policies and procedures from 5 years ago that nobody's following and they're just sitting there collecting dust. You know, what works for a big EVM project won't necessarily work for a 3-month services project. The other thing for the PMO, and to me, this is a new concept for the PMO, is to really manage resources and manage the resource management discipline overall. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a little bit, but having that resource management, I think it will be a huge discriminator. People who really embrace that discipline are going to me, have a leg up, okay? And they're going to execute better and they're going to be able to plan better. You also want to have KPIs for the enterprise. They want to define those KPIs, at least from at the project level. They want to make sure too that the KPIs that they're looking at for the projects, that they have the overall org goals in mind, that they're owned by the right person, and that they're put in the language that the business can understand. And my real example there is in EVM, there's an indice called TCPI, or to complete performance indice. And that's really hard for people to understand what that means. But what you can understand is how much work to go do we have and how much does that going to cost? You know, so putting it in words that people really can get. You also want to have consistent reporting. And, you know, there's got to be some base reporting that you can have for all of your projects. You know, I've been around for a long time and I've seen a whole lot of times where we went off and we allowed different projects to have all of their own reports. Nothing was standardized and we ended up with tons of reports that we had to maintain and create. So if you could just come up with a standard set, that would really help. And it also helps keep people from siloing back into Excel and using that as the basis for what they need. The other thing that the PMO should do is make sure that there's role-based training on policies and procedures as well as tools. You know, one thing about the role-based training for policies and procedures is I'm a whole lot likely more to follow those policies and procedures if I understand what the impact of me not doing that is on the person downstream. So again, that's the purpose, some of the major concepts around the PMO, but it really is designed to help project managers and provide an overall structure so that you can execute very well. Okay, so let's talk about whether or not you have a PMO. And I've actually been around long enough now where I saw the PMO was very much in vogue and then it went down and now it's back on the rise again. And so there's really 2 ways in my mind that a PMO can operate. The first is centralized, and that centralized PMO is at the enterprise level. And so all of the projects are benefiting from, and the enterprise are benefiting from the PMO. You can also have decentralized, which is maybe you set up a PMO for one of your major projects or one of your major programs, but those are the only ones that are benefiting from the PMO. Or you may have no PMO at all. So Rich, I thought this was interesting. I just want to give you this stat. So from our 2019 report, 37% of our respondents had no PMO, 41% were centralized, and 22% were decentralized. And so we had seen a rise in centralized PMOs, and I think that's awesome. Is that what you're, oh, here we go. Yep. So from the poll, we had 44% that were centralized, 13% decentralized, and 44% with no PMO. Okay, so that's something that you could definitely consider doing to help with your project execution.
Yeah, that's what numbers guys like me call a bimodal distribution. I got two humps in that curve and a trough in between. So I've either got nothing or I've got a centralized organization that's doing it for everybody. And I guess that pretty much aligns with my own experience and what I've seen out there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm just surprised there's more centralized, but I think that's good news. That means that people are really concentrating on project management overall, Rich. So.
Well, it's also efficient. And in a delivery order world where things are short, you can't really afford to build a big PMO for a major project if you don't have a major project. So a
Exactly.
centralized PMO that can be consistent over job after job after job and have a consistent, stable staff makes more sense. It's also more efficient from dollars and cents point of view. And it helps planning, and that's what we're talking about now. Now, planning, we're talking real world now. Forget all of the funding and budgeting stuff and winning a proposal and everything else. I got a package of work. I have a demand from a customer, and I need the resources to get that done. And that means I need a plan. That plan has to be literally real time. I can't afford to wait a week to see what my numbers did when I changed something. I need to see it when I click OK. And that means living with constraints too, because Sally may be the most qualified person to do the work, but Sally's already overcommitted. So I need to be able to turn to a resource management capability in my system and say, show me people with PMP and 10 years experience that know something about military training. And with a click of a button or two, I need to be able to see who's available that has those skill sets that could be applied to my project. And that's just an example. It could be anything. It could be subject matter experts. It could be people with experience doing logistics on military systems, or it could be people with experience doing web design for CMS. It could be anything, but if I can't see my resources and I can't see real-time effects of changes to plans, I'm crippled. I'm literally flying blind. And that's what that planning is all about. It's not only a guide to where I'm trying to go and what I'm going to do to get there, but I ought to be able to look backwards and compare that plan to my actuals and see, did it work? Because if it didn't, I need to do something different, not next month or next year, but tomorrow. Next slide, please.
Rich, are you there? Okay, so if you can hear me, I will continue on then. And where we are right now is the feedback loop. So what Rich had been talking about was really getting your budget, getting your forecast together, starting that plan, and then starting to really execute your project. And so now we end up in the feedback loop where we're planning and executing, and we continue in that loop because things are changing. I'm sorry, Richard's trying to get a hold of me here. Things are changing continually. We're continuing to execute, we're continuing to plan, we have changes, and we have to deal with all of that, okay? So when I'm asking as a project manager, You know, what do I really need in order to plan and execute the project? What I really need to know, and you guys substantiated that when we were first asking what your biggest project management challenge was. You know, that biggest project management challenge was being able to see the information that you need, being able to get a status of it. So we have one question, and that one question is, where am I? Okay, and a project manager would much rather know where they are today, so plus or minus just a little bit, than where they were precisely 2 or 3 weeks ago. So having that real-time information for project success is huge. Okay.
Actually, I
So
had that conversation, Kim, with a project manager. Actually, it was the COO of a company yesterday. And he said, I know exactly where I am, but it's 3 weeks old when I get it. And I said, you know, I can tell you where you are as of right now, this minute, but I have to tell you, it's probably plus or minus 25 bucks. He said, I don't care. 25 bucks is nothing. I'll take it. And I get that response pretty much every single time.
me too, and I think it is more important. I mean, 2 or 3 weeks on a short burn project, you may already be at the end of the period. You know, so you definitely want to have that real-time visibility into your project stats. So one methodology that we can use to help projects be more successful is earned value management. And so what I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to talk about it briefly, but this is using earned value management as a best practice. And so I think earned value management over the years has kind of gotten a bad rap, because, you know, it really is just the basics of project management. You know, it facilitates scope, schedule, and cost. And every single project that I've ever been on has those three on them. And so I think if you elect to use EVM as a best practice, there's just absolutely no doubt in my mind that your projects are going to be more predictable, and the success of your projects are going to increase. And so if you do use that and consider it, you're going to have more reliable and realistic plans. You're going to get that early detection. Okay, so that information that the project managers need in order to course correct and then fix something before it becomes a huge problem. So to me, that is one of the major reasons as a project manager that I would want to use EVM. Keep in mind too that earned value management can be tailored for any kind of project that you have. So internal, external, indirect, or direct. I've used it on many different types of projects, and I haven't really seen a project yet that wouldn't benefit from EVM. So I do believe that earned value management is the key to the kingdom. It combines schedule and cost to answer one really important question that we all want to know. What work was done for the money that we spent? Okay, and that's also critical for executing, but it's also very important for putting together proposal estimates. So if I look at these puzzle pieces, the first puzzle piece, I have a set of tasks, and as they complete, value is assigned to them. So dollars, hours, or units. The second one, that earned value then that I've just claimed, then can be compared to actuals and budget, and I can get cost and schedule variances for current and cum to date. And then with those, I can also get indices, SPIs and CPIs, and then get independent estimates at complete. So see where I think the project is going to end up. The third piece of the puzzle is progress then can be measured in hours, dollars, or units. Okay, some people really only want to hold the project manager accountable for hours. They don't really necessarily have influence over the indirect cost or the rates, but some want to hold them responsible for hours and dollars. It really just depends on your overall business model. So the big three to me is scope, schedule, and cost. And these three are present in every single project. They have to be, or the project wouldn't exist. So from a scope perspective, you know, what is the product or goods or service that I'm going to be making for my customer? When am I going to deliver it? And how much did it cost? I've had people tell me that they didn't have a schedule. There was no schedule provided to them. And so I'll ask them, hey, do you not have start and stop dates of the project? There's no period of performance, you know, and then that answer immediately will change. Okay, so everybody's got all three of these, and EVM is going to give you that structured process to manage all three of them. Now, this is just an example of a report that you could use. So it'll give you the project. On the side, you have the project codes. You can put in the % complete of those particular tasks or projects on the side, and then you're going to be able to see all of this information. So you're going to be able to look at your cost and schedule variances, you're going to be able to see indices, and you're going to see them for current period, cumulative, and at complete. And there's a whole lot of metrics here that you can get from EVM, and I'll briefly show that, but it'll be in your package, and you can look over those when you get this presentation. This roadmap really does define the artifacts and the information that you're going to need to establish a starting point of the baseline, and you can use that in your EVM journey. And as you're establishing the baseline, Rich mentioned management reserve. So it's really important on your project to put a little money back. Go in, take a look at what your scope is going to be as you negotiate with the folks who are actually the work package managers who are actually doing the work. Set a little money back for things that are in scope that you forgot. Okay, so it is a very important concept, and one that everybody should be thinking about when they begin that baselining process. All right, here are these metrics. Again, I'm not going to walk through them, but you'll have them, and then you can reference them at any time. Okay, so we started to get quite a few questions around EVM over the last year or so. So we wanted to know what you think about EVM. Do you consider EVM in your business a best practice for your projects, a must do because the contract requires it, or a nice to do that you think is just not going to change the project outcomes? And Rich, I think that a lot of people still think that it's a nice to do, and it may well be a nice to do, but in a tool like Uninet, you can do it pretty simply. And so I think you get a lot of value out of that if you look at just doing it as a best practice. All right, so wow, that's great. So 63% of you guys said that you use it as a best practice for your projects. And then a nice to do is 32% and a must do is 5%. That's awesome. That's great.
I'm going to pick a nit, Kim, because they didn't say they did it. They said they considered it a best practice.
That's right. So hopefully you're doing it, right?
Well, it kind of depends on what level of EVM someone is doing. I don't know any government contractors that do the full DoD EI 768 level of EVM voluntarily. They do it if the contract requires it because it's expensive.
It is.
But it is. As a simple management discipline, if your system supports it, it can be absolutely invaluable. And I do know companies that use it as a management discipline who don't go to the extent of 768 for compliance.
All right, so here we go with accounting, Rich.
And this accounting is all of the different pieces we've been talking about, from billing and revenue recognition to the financial statements. And by the way, the EVM that Kim has been talking about can also be a useful tool in revenue recognition, particularly if you have to comply with the new FASB standard for revenue recognition. That thing is causing a lot of consternation, but for government services contractors in particular, it really shouldn't be that intrusive because a lot of what we do is already matched to our effort. So our revenues and our cost streams and earned value are already pretty well matched for most of our contract types. It's the fixed price stuff that frankly would benefit most from EVM and would use EVM as a tool for revenue recognition. Your system should support all of those things, and the accounting for the project should take into account all of the sources of cost whether it's time, whether it's expense, vendor invoices, or subcontractor vouchers from your purchasing system. And of course, it has to generate the billings and do the revenue recognition. To the extent that your system is able to do an invoice your customer will accept directly from your system, it can be an absolutely huge time savings. To the extent that your system won't do that and you have to substitute Excel for that, it can be a huge time sink. So choose well. And so what do you need in an accounting system that's completely integrated with all the other pieces we've been talking about? Your general ledger has to be the core of all your systems. DCAA requires it. It's the first question on the standard form 1408. Is your project ledger under general ledger control? And the answer almost always is yes. It has to be yes if you want real compliance. Otherwise, you have to work really hard. Now, compliance is not about a system. It's not about software. It's about your policies and procedures and practices, and to some extent, your people and their skill sets. So if you have been doing this for a long time and you really know what you're doing and you're willing to work really, really hard, you could be compliant with a shoebox and a pile of Post-it notes. But if you have an integrated system that will do all of the general ledger stuff, all of the AR with project-centric capability, all of the AP, again, with project-centric capability, you can achieve compliance, get the results you're looking for, and do it with a whole lot less hard work. Everything from pipeline management to accounting and all the things in between, especially that planning and execution circular cycle, needs to be completely integrated. If I have to put the same information in 3 of these boxes, that's wasted time and effort. It's lost cycles. And as a manager or a business entrepreneur, I can't afford those lost cycles. Next, Kim. Am I frozen again? If you can hear me, Kim, I seem to be frozen. I need to go to the KPI. There we go. We've all heard the term KPI. It's a key performance indicator. That's a value. It's either measurable or calculable that tells me how I'm doing. Some KPIs are financial. Right there. Some KPIs are measure effectiveness. Some KPIs measure utilization or realization. There are lots of different ones, but they're all keyed to an objective of some sort at some level of the business. Next slide, please. So what's your desired outcome? That's what the KPIs need to be keyed to. If you're measuring something and it doesn't contribute to an outcome or measure an outcome, that's a wasted cycle. So does that outcome matter? I actually do a presentation from time to time called Metrics That Matter, because we measure things sometimes because the industry does it. It's a standard. Everybody knows what their blank KPI is, but it doesn't matter to my organization. We don't either measure to it, or it doesn't control or measure one of my outcomes. Don't do that. Pick metrics that matter to you, to your company. Is it something I can use to measure actual progress? Because if it's not, I don't need it. And who can influence the outcome of that KPI? Because if I'm measuring a KPI that I can't control, that doesn't help me either. And finally, how often will you look at that KPI? Because if you're looking at it once a year, not going to help you a lot. If you're looking at it once a month, that might be a pretty good frequency. If you're looking at it every day, chances are you're looking at it too often. And can you do that? Can you measure something too often? Absolutely. I actually have some friends right now that are taking their temperature every few hours. Not useful, okay? Once a day is probably more than adequate. And for KPIs, it's the same thing. How often should you measure it? Because how often can you actually take an action that's going to influence it? Every KPI, if you're picking the right ones, they should have a clear purpose. They should have business language that everybody that sees it understands. We have a bad habit in this market space, in this industry, of speaking in acronyms. So we talk about DSOs and KPIs and income after depreciation or before depreciation expenses. And if everybody doesn't understand what all those acronyms are, they're not useful.
You know, one thing on this chart, though, that I think is really important is that having a holistic approach. You know, you don't want to do something that's going to cause an unintended consequence. Like, for instance, say that you decide that every single project is going to stay on schedule. And you're going to put all the resources on there you need to stay on schedule. And then all of a sudden you look up and you're overrunning. So you really want to make sure when you pick that KPI that you really look at the whole of the organization and what the impact could be of that KPI as you
Oh,
drive
goodness
to it.
knows we live and breathe unintended consequences in this town. We actually expect unintended consequences. That might be a little bit of a non sequitur.
Well, I tell you what, too, and I love the IPA rule, and it's not that we're drinking beer, but I love the IPA rule. The I is it important? And can it something that we can improve? Do we have the authority? So to me, that becomes something I can look at that IPA for every single KPI and every single metric that we look at for our organization.
And I can't tell you how often I've talked to people about metrics and they say, I know this is really important, but I can't change it. It's
Right.
beyond my control. Then measuring it may be useful intellectually, but it's not going to advance your business objectives.
So we looked at trends for project management in 2020, and so we're about out of time, but we can run through these pretty quick, Rich. So the first one was, you know, the increasing importance of the project management office. Again, we've seen that on the rise. I do believe that it can be a discriminator for winning new business and then being able to execute your projects successfully.
It can also be a source of efficiencies, especially
Exactly.
those centralized PMOs.
Exactly. The next one is create a resource management practice. And we ask every year on the Gauge report, you know, how mature is your process for resource management? And 51% say that they have an immature process. And I don't believe that. I think it's much lower than that. I mean, higher than that. I think that a lot of people are still using Excel spreadsheets to manage their resources. But we did have 8% that said they were very mature. And so, you know, I think that's where you want to be a part of, is that 8% that are really concentrating on their resources and maximizing them. The third is collaboration for success. And I want you to think about projects and how social that they are. You know, there's so many interactions. There was a chart that Rich pitched about forecasting and budgeting and had it up there. And you talk about all the different stakeholders within your organization, not to then count your subcontractors and then your customer also. All right, Rich, you can take it from here.
Well, it's a trend to invest in project managers. And unfortunately, a number of software systems out there create a disincentive to bring new project managers along. We should be investing in the next generation of project managers. That discipline ought to be growing and spreading throughout your organization like a virus. Boy, that's a bad example today, isn't it?
Yes, Rich.
But it should be spreading through the organization. And if you have to call your software vendor and say, I need 3 more seats of project manager in my budgeting and planning system, that's not good. Most systems today will allow you to assign any role to any person, and that makes growing your project managers easier, less expensive, and it lets you try people out in roles that you might not be willing to take a flyer on if it costs you a lot of money. And finally, establish success-driven KPIs. By success-driven, I mean KPIs that matter, KPIs that you can actually influence and that drive you toward your business objectives. If the KPIs aren't driving you toward your business objectives, I would postulate that they're not worth measuring. Give it a try and see what you think. We'd love to hear from you, by the way.
Yeah, there were several questions about EVM, and I would absolutely love for you to email me, and hook up with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to talk to you about it. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it back over. I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you, Kim. And thank you as well, Rich. And again, we appreciate your insight and Uninet's support of SECAF. We ask everyone on the line, visit SECAF's website homepage to see the virtual events that we have coming up. Got two in particular that are coming up. One a little less than 2 weeks from now, the 26th. We have a GovCon virtual networking event from 5 to 6:30 in the evening. And then also on June 9th, via webinar, it's going to be an executive briefing entitled Virtualized Procurement Process, Are You Ready? And that's going to be from 10:30 to noon on the 9th. We want to thank everyone in attendance for joining us. We're going to be sending you an email tomorrow before noon and with the link to the recorded webinar. And finally, a link to a brief post-webinar survey, again, will follow in a few minutes. And please take a few minutes to answer any questions that you may have. Your feedback is important for us. For all the SECAF members, we will post this webinar for our future reference on the SECAF website, accessible to members only. If you're not a member of SECAF, please visit our website at www.secaf.org for more information about membership. We want to thank everyone again for their time today and hope everyone has a good afternoon and stay safe out there.